Political cartoonists have been impacting politics in America since the days before the Revolution, when Benjamin Franklin commented on the disunited state of the British colonies in his famous Join or Die drawing, to Thomas Nast in the 19th century bringing down Boss Tweed's corrupt Tammany Hall political machine, to Herblock observing that Nixon had a moral 5 o'clock shadow. Here in Pittsburgh, for the last quarter of a century, it's been Rob Rogers lampooning presidents on both sides of the political aisle for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including, of course, Donald Trump. But it was his Trump cartoons that got Rogers in trouble with conservative Post-Gazette publisher John Robinson Block and editorial page director Keith Burris, leading to his controversial firing earlier this year. A CNN editorial called Rogers' dismissal Orwellian and a frightening omen. On this edition of Primal Interviews, we're talking with Rob Rogers about what happened to this former Pulitzer Prize finalist and what will happen to the art of political cartoons in America, particularly in this time of Trump. As I mentioned, you've been poking fun at presidents since Bill Clinton, and even candidate Hillary Clinton has been the butt of some of your jokes. You were given a free hand, and then all of a sudden, late last May, early June, the Post-Gazette started killing your cartoons. What changed and why?
I definitely think it's because the publisher decided that he liked Donald Trump, and so for 2 years I was drawing Trump, but I was getting some pushback, but it was never to the degree of killing the cartoons. And then in March of 2018, the publisher brought in Keith Burris from Toledo to be my immediate boss. Once he was brought in, then suddenly the cartoons started getting killed. So he was basically enforcing what the publisher felt, but wasn't able to do on his own, without him. So, for better, I don't know how else to describe it except to say that, I saw Burris as sort of the publisher's enforcer.
What exactly was going on between you and the powers that be at the Post-Gazette?
It looks sort of overnight, like it happened overnight, but I think it was sort of a slow burn in terms of his becoming more conservative. Now, I'm just guessing. I can't get inside of his head. But back in, I think it was 2010, we endorsed Corbett for governor. And everybody was shocked, and they were like, why are we endorsing a Republican? Clearly we don't agree with his politics, because the paper has always been left-leaning, and so that was the first sort of sign that he was going to start inserting his more conservative politics into the paper. But really, it didn't extend to me at all, never. And then when Trump came along, I think he just decided that, as we've seen in other cases, that this suddenly empowered him to let those otherwise sort of hidden feelings come out, and politics.
Do you think the fact that President Trump has such thin skin has caused his supporters, like John Robinson Block, to also be thin-skinned and to feel as though they can step in and interfere with your work?
It's kind of strange. It's sort of a combination of the thin-skinnedness, but also this idea that, people who believe in, white supremacy or even just something as simple as the white man's plight, that we're somehow being eliminated in the world, people that believe that kind of thing don't really talk about it. But when Trump came along, suddenly there was the you were allowed to talk about sexist things or racist things or misogyny. I mean, you could sort of outwardly say those things, because the president was doing it. So why not? Why can't I say it now? So I think that that had more to do with it than sort of this thin-skinned idea of liberal cartoons or liberal politics. But I do think that played a part. I think that Trump is very thin-skinned, as you say, and doesn't like any criticism and fights back and sort of pushes against it as fake news or whatever. And I think that the publisher was doing the same thing. He was sort of pushing back on me, saying I was too angry, the cartoons were too harsh. These cartoons were not any harder on Trump than I was on Bill Clinton when he was going through the Monica Lewinsky thing, or even on George W. Bush during the Iraq War. I was much harder on those guys, or equally as hard. So I don't really understand his argument there, except to say that he had found somebody who was championing his own darker beliefs, and he didn't want me to make fun of him.
Mr. Block said, quote, "This has little to do with politics, ideology, or Donald Trump. It has mostly to do with working together and the editing process," end quote. What do you think?
Well, so I met with John Block once in 2016, once in 2017 to talk about my, cartoons about Trump and how we differed on, what we felt he was doing for the country or, doing to the country. And we agreed to kind of disagree on how we felt about him, but we sort of agreed that, okay, I don't have to draw Trump every day, but it's important to draw the president, especially when he's in the news every day. And so we kind of just would have these meetings where we would talk around it, and he never said you absolutely can't draw Trump, but I think what he wanted to say was, I want you to be nicer to him. He was saying, he did say, less blood in your cartoons, which didn't make sense to me because they're not bloody, but I think what he meant is, less vitriol or less anger, but I was just drawing him the way I would draw any politician that was doing the things he was doing. But then, when Burris was sort of promoted and came to Pittsburgh, I had lunch with him. And, we had lunch, we got to know each other a little bit. He said, at the end of the lunch, he said, well, we really need to talk about your Trump cartoons and how the publisher feels about them. And again, we sort of talked around it a little bit because I felt like I had to draw Trump. And so, basically, again, we agreed, I don't have to draw him 6 days a week, but I should draw him. And then something was revealed at that lunch that then became clear about the reason why they were pushing back on me. And that was, he said, the publisher believes that the editorial cartoonist should reflect the opinions of the paper and not his own opinion. And I said, well, that's news to me because that's not really the job of an editorial cartoonist. And that's never been the way it has been for me for 25 years. And so I sort of left that lunch thinking, this is in March, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how much time I have left here, but we're definitely going to butt heads here. Now, I did try to work very hard to compromise, to pick different topics, to change little things in the cartoons that wouldn't hurt the integrity but would make them happy. But I could tell what they were pushing for. What they were pushing for was me to be a different cartoonist, to draw positive things about Trump. They wouldn't say it outright. And even when they fired me, they said, this isn't about Trump, this isn't about politics, it's about being collaborative. But their idea of being collaborative was me drawing what they wanted me to draw. It had nothing to do with being collaborative, really. And all you have to do is look at the cartoons that ultimately got killed to know that it was about Trump and it was about politics. Some of the cartoons were about race, and some of the cartoons were directly about Trump. But they all were sort of in that same ballpark.
And so what was your response to them?
When they said, you need to have less anger or less vitriol or less blood in your cartoons, I just kind of nodded. I didn't really say you're right. I'm, editorial cartooning is way too harsh and angry, and we need to do Marmaduke in the paper on the editorial page, I didn't know what to say, so I just sort of nodded and said, well, I would agree with him on the things that we could agree about. Like I said, drawing Trump every day, but I just said, well, I disagree. I think that this president is very dangerous. I think that he is taking the country in a bad direction, and I think it's important for me as a cartoonist and a journalist to point that out. So, and then he would say, well, yeah, but, and we never resolved it. But what we did agree to was the idea that if they didn't like something on Trump, they could reject it, and I could still send it out for syndication, because that had been the way we had operated for 25 years. Because there were a couple of cartoons about the church that got killed, and I was still allowed to send them out. But then when Burris came in, he wasn't as happy about that arrangement, and I told Burris, well, this is our agreement, And so even when they were killing the cartoons, I was still sending them out for syndication. And that started to get under their skin, both of them. I think they started to think that we want him to buckle under. We don't want him to just draw the same cartoons he was drawing and then just send them out, even if they're not in the paper.
You said that you thought you might lose your job for reasons other than your political ideology, but that is in fact what ended up getting you fired.
You know, people were saying, I can't believe what they're doing to you. And I'd say, I can't either. I've been trying to reach out to them. I've been trying to compromise to find a way to work this out. I suggested many times, move me to the op-ed page, because that way you can do whatever you want with the editorial page, and I'll still have my following, and you'll still have those readers, and you'll be offering them a different opinion. You know, and I said, isn't that what that page is all about? And diversity of opinion is important, and we need to, you know, keep the conversation going. So, and you'll still have my local cartoons and all that. And they said no. So when it happened, the way it happened, I was equally as surprised. But yeah, I didn't go quietly because they made it almost impossible for me to go quietly. That's kind of what happened.
Why did you go public with your grievances about the Post-Gazette killing your cartoons?
Usually I would get 1 or 2 cartoons killed a year, but from March to June I had 18 cartoons or cartoon ideas killed. And that's a lot. So people started noticing that they weren't in the paper, and they followed me on social media, so they would mention it. And then some people just jumped right to it and said, oh, they're killing your cartoons, you know. And then and finally what happened was, about the 4th cartoon during the week when 6 in a row were killed, at about the 4th cartoon, I finally admitted, when I posted it, I said, yep, this is the 4th one in a row that's been killed this week. So that's when the media picked it up. That's when a lot of people started picking it up. But I still wasn't talking about it. I wasn't talking about why or what was happening. I just let everybody else kind of come to those conclusions. But that's kind of how it first broke. Then, after we did finally talk, which wasn't, I didn't actually talk to them. I talked to the human resources guy. But when they finally came back to me with what they wanted me to do, it was this contract that was basically onerous. It had all of these stipulations in it. It talked about my anger. It talked about you know, doing cartoons by committee with the publisher and the editorial page editor. And it also said that they could not pay me for cartoons that were killed. And you know, it was a ludicrous thing. And so I ended up, after I got that contract, I knew that they were not serious about working this out with me. So I was still employed, but that's when I went on Jake Tapper and CNN and talked about it. And really all I did there was say, you would have to ask them why they're killing these cartoons. But you know, I know the publisher likes Trump, and I'm drawing cartoons about Trump. So you can figure it out.
So what is the message in all of this about press freedoms, particularly at a time in America when there's been so much hostility shown toward the media by President Trump?
When the president yells and screams about fake news and enemy of the people, and you know, sort of blasts the media and the free press, we can look at him and say, well, we either agree with him or disagree with him, but he is kind of spouting out crazy talk. But when it filters down to the publishers and the news organizations like Sinclair Media and Block Communications, when those things happen, then it's really dangerous, because then you have people who are actually employing journalists who are siding with the president instead of keeping him honest. Instead of being the watchdog of society, you have newspapers that are just basically becoming yes men for the White House. And you know, he's got enough of those in Congress. He doesn't really need people outside, especially in the media, doing that. So I think it's very dangerous, because that's all you need to really start some sort of a autocracy, is to have people just go along and say, okay, this sounds good. We'll let you tell us what to print and what stories to write, and we'll write nice things about you. It's really not that far from you know, from some of these countries where the media is state-run.
Is there a wider threat to editorial cartooning?
I think there is. I mean, if you look at some of these other countries like Turkey and Afghanistan and Iran, where cartoonists are being jailed or beaten or even, just exiled, I think that there's a danger that we could slip into that. And I think that you could say, oh, well, we're not even close to that yet, or we're not very close to that at all. It doesn't take much. And so I would say that, yes, this is dangerous. And listen, satire has always been one of the characteristics of a free society and of a democracy, and is one of the benchmarks of free speech. So the minute you take that away, you're going to start infringing on other elements of free speech.
If the future of editorial cartoons and the autonomy of political cartoonists is being threatened, someone might ask, so what? They're just cartoons. What does it really matter? What is your response?
Cartoons are a much faster and quicker way to get a message, especially an important message to readers. And they speak volumes above, say an editorial that is sort of gray. And the graphic impact of a cartoon can get there much quicker. And especially with readers, the attention span is so small that a cartoon can have an immediate impact. So I think it's important in that way, just in communicating ideas. But then also I think that satire represents something in this society that shows that we are not in a monarchy, or we're not living under a despotic ruler. That's what it shows. It shows that we live in a democracy and that we are able to make fun of people in power. That's the job of a cartoonist. So I think it's the sign. Cartoons are the sign of a healthy democracy. Editorial cartoons are a sign of a healthy democracy. And so we need to keep those things alive.
Rob Rogers has a new book coming out in November of 2018. It's called Enemy of the People, a cartoonist in Trump's America. Rob Rogers, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.